Hey everyone, it's Ed Gutowski. I wanted to welcome you to week 3, and I wanted to just kind of create a short lecture in which I talk a little bit more about rhetoric and argument. Hey, the discussion board questions have been great, and we have a little bit of an understanding of how we're going to define rhetoric. And it's interesting because some students like to use the term persuade as part of their definition, but I'm still going to maintain my definition of rhetoric as words that are used to manipulate, deceive, and con people. So what I want to do in this lecture is just add to our next understanding of how rhetoric and argument works, because there's 3 things that rhetoric and argument always use. And rhetoric and argument always uses logos, pathos, and ethos. So I'm going to briefly kind of introduce you to these concepts. Some of you may be familiar with them. Others of you, this may be the first time that you've heard about them, which is totally fine. But if we talk about the first word, the first word that's associated with rhetoric and argument is logos. And most students can either hear the word logos or see the word logos, and the first thing that they come up with is logic. So logos is an appeal to logic. And I love students because sometimes they come up with the best definitions of what words mean. So sometimes if I were in a ground class and I were to write down the word logos, students might use things like facts or statistics. And that would make sense, right? Because if you think about it, an argument, if we're going to want to have an argument, we want to have a logical argument. And a logical argument is going to use things like facts and statistics. So the first thing that rhetoric and argument always use is logos. The second term that rhetoric and argument always uses is pathos. Now, pathos is an appeal to emotion. And so if you want to accept my definition of rhetoric as words used to mislead, deceive, and con people, then would it make sense that you'd want to use an emotional appeal, because we're all emotional beings. Now, the way that I always kind of try to remember pathos as emotion is with the P. I can think of, passionate, right? Someone who is passionate about something is using a lot of emotions. So there's trying to create a mnemonic way so students can remember that pathos is an appeal to emotion. So we know that rhetoric and argument uses logos, which is an appeal to logic, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion, and ethos is the third one. And ethos can be defined in 2 ways. Ethos can be defined as character or authority, and sometimes it can be defined as ethics and morals. In our class, I will define ethos as an appeal to character and authority. And that's the one that students can have a little bit of a problem. What do you mean by character authority? Well, if you think of something like Nike, when Nike wants to sell their product, they generally use someone like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, right? They use these people's character and authority. Why? Because Michael Jordan has the character of being and the authority of being maybe the greatest basketball player of all time. LeBron James is sometimes considered to be the greatest basketball player of all time. So they use his character and authority to sell basketball shoes. I always use in a ground class, if you want to think about ethos as character and authority, I ask students, would you rather pick me as your English instructor, or would you rather have a professor at Harvard? And that's always kind of a funny topic to use, because some students, you would think someone who taught at Harvard would have such a high ethos that students would always want to be taught by the Harvard professor, right? Because Harvard's maybe the greatest university in the United States. But the flip side of that character and authority, some students say, no, I wouldn't want to have him teach your class because he might be hard or he might be arrogant, right? So there's a difference on how I perceive the character and authority of a Harvard instructor, as someone teaching at the greatest university in the United States, where a student's perception of the Harvard ethos is arrogant and overbearing. So I just want you to think about these 3 things. There's another video you can watch, and think about which one would you consider to be the most important. Would it be logos, which is an appeal to logic, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion, or ethos, which is an appeal to character and authority?